Top of the middle of the day to you, boys and girls. We're at the bench in the shop for another little narrative session, and today, for your viewing pleasure, we're going to compare and contrast the successor Mini-Me to the predecessor Mini-Me. We have a 346 XP. This is my personal saw, and we have a 550 XP that comes out of Northwest Oregon. Throwing out the disclaimers right off the bat, this will be a narrative because we're at the bench, long and tedious if you're not similarly bent like myself and a knuckle/gearhead type. It might be considered long and tedious. Hopefully you find it enjoyable and informative. However, the other part of that equation is I'm pulling all this information from my, well, way in the depths of my cranium, somewhere in the back where there's a lot of cobwebs. Please forgive me if I slammer my speech. That would be slur and or stammer. Check the description for any qualifications and clarifications that I find where I misspoke through this process. Check the description area too if you're interested in some custom saw modifications. That's the best way to get a hold of me. So, moving right along to the good stuff, outwardly on the bench, you can tell they're not the same saw. You can tell that they're the same size of saw, maybe the same class of saw, but they don't look too much alike, which you wouldn't expect it to be that way. This is a 2000 version. This is a 2017 version. Maybe a little bit of history, at least a little bit that I know. So this is a 2000 vintage. I think they actually hit the deck in '99. This saw was the fastest production saw, I think, at that point. Came out about 16,000 right out of the box. The 254 might have been, I think it was the predecessor to the 346. They were moving right along out of the box too. So they were moving right along. 16 grand out of the box. That's kind of impressive. The 550, I never really followed that saw that much. I can't remember when it hit the deck, maybe 6-7 years ago or something like that. They've been around for a while. Something like that, I don't know. I weighed these two saws. They're 3/4 of a pound off. The 346 comes in heavy, but we're going to discuss why some of that is. Full wrap handlebars, double dog set. The dogs are big. That's the most of it right there. I don't know what else to say. Oh, so there's a couple versions of this saw. The early version, I think, was a 46.45 cc saw. It had, I think it was a 43 millimeter bore, 32 millimeter stroke. It's a little more over square version than what we see in the 550. Comes in at a 43 millimeter bore and a 34 millimeter stroke. So they kind of have switched over a little bit, running a little bit longer stroke and a little bit smaller bore in these saws. I'm not exactly sure why they've done that. However, generally more of a stroke number or a longer stroke number gives you a little bit more low-end grunt. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. Possibly, I'm not sure. I weighed the pistons. This is actually a different big bore than the standard big bore, so they upgraded. I don't remember when that was, 2007 or 8 or something. They bumped the bore up to 44.3 millimeters, I think is what they did. That put that in 50.32 class. I think that's what came out. If you do the math, this saw comes in with the standard numbers that it has at 49.37, so we're 49.32. They're relatively close, almost exact. My particular saw has a big bore kit that I did in 2006. It's actually sporting a 45 millimeter bore. That puts that saw at 50.89, I believe it is, if you do the math. So it's a little bit bigger in displacement, not quite 2 than these, and then also the standard big bore that you buy from the factory. I got squirrely, did a bunch of big boring 10-11 years ago. That's just one of the saws that I did. You can see that thing in action, pulling an 18, running on a hardwood that's actually cured, moves right along, and this only has the what you'd consider the extreme kit of today. We're actually going to insanoize that thing and see what we get. Now that I've segued completely out in outer space, let's get rolling on the rest of this stuff. We've established that they don't look that much alike. It's only about half of an inch longer, but we do have a lot bigger dogs set up. We'll be looking at that here in a minute. Let's take a look at the handlebars. I'm going to have to probably roll through since I spent so much time yapping. But anyway, you can see if we line them up with the tank on the bottom, it's a half of an inch or so wider, half of an inch taller on the 346 set. If you line it up with the tank on the support that goes to the upper part, you can see that they're relatively close to the same, so I guess it depends on how you look at it. Like I said, part of the reason it weighs more is we have a much heavier duty and heavier handlebar setup on the 346. I use that saw mostly for climbing in monkey business, like chunking things out. I've used it a few days here and there when we had a super brushy patch and you had to saw your way starting at the landing to the bottom of the strip. If you had a bunch of small wood, running a 28, you could actually finish the rest of the day cutting with that saw running a 28 and do okay. I wouldn't say that'd be my ultimate choice. I think for a 24-inch size bar, this is a good little machine. We're going to be looking at some things as we go along. So the cylinder covers, for example, similar concept, the way they're attached. You got the 3-spring latch system. It's kind of tough looking though. I think that they look pretty cool the way they've designed it. We are dealing with a heating issue with the stratification process in a lot of the smog saws of today. One of the things they did was they opened up this slot at the top in here, letting the air get out of there a little quicker. There's a tech bulletin that came out on this saw that I read. I don't even remember. It was like 3-4 years ago. They ovalized the exhaust to help get away from some of the seizing issues, trying to, I would imagine, dump out the exhaust gases a little bit faster. Husky's not the only saw that's had problems with overheating. They pulled the 661 out of Australia really early on because it was overheating down there. I never saw that cylinder fin configuration, so I don't know if it's changed now from what it was then. But like I said, Husqvarna is not the only saw that's having issues with overheating. But that's an interesting side note. If we look underneath and take a look at the air cleaners themselves, this is a nylon mesh. We can see we're passing some fine dust. The way it looks in here, it looks like it's coming through the mesh itself, but you can see there's a evidence all the way up to where the mesh starts on the top part. I have ordered the flock version of this filter for this gentleman. I think he'll be well pleased with the differential and the fact that we don't have a bunch of crap making it into our engine. This is the 346 version. It's an air injection system. The charge is blown in right there off the flywheel, comes in underneath, blows in on the bottom. It is a flock version. I've never seen anything really pass by this particular filter. It's not even a quarter twist. It's about a 1/6 of a twist application to get it on the velocity stack, or the air horn they call it, combination with the choke and the switch. Just an interesting concept. It has a pretty nice smooth transition. We have a cant that's not exactly 90, maybe we're at 85 or something. If we look at what's going on with the 550, we see that it's nice and wide and open. I actually prefer this particular design where the air's coming in on the top and the bottom, nice and wide. In the air horn, this is what Husqvarna calls this particular piece right here. Same kind of concept, how we have the on-off switch, the choke mechanism, same side of the saw. We do have a bulb for priming the system though. You can see there's some crap down in there. Like I said, we're pulling some stuff by this nylon, I believe. There is a little trick I have for sealing this operation up. I do that for my clients. Anyway, the air that goes for the stratification process isn't completely raw, but it's for the most part raw. You get a little bit of blowback until the skirt closes off the intake port, so there's a little bit of air-fuel mixture in here that's getting mixed in with the stratified air. I like that a lot better than some of the other saws, maybe from another brand that are out there. I think you get a little bit more gas in with the stratification air. Think about the stratification process. It's kind of like a controlled air leak, metered by the amount of time that the reliefs in the back of the skirt are open, letting the fresh air get in there, but essentially we're creating a barrier. But if you look at the concept, we're adding raw air for the most part into the system. If you have an air leak through a seal or a gasket or something, that creates a lean situation, which is a heat situation. That's why the saws melt down a lot of times. We're doing it in a metered fashion with the new saws. Just an interesting concept. That's one of the reasons why they changed the exhaust shape on this particular saw and added the relief in the cylinder cover. So there's a lot of situations that you have to consider on these saws. Just an interesting concept. We're going to hit reverse for just a second because I forgot. Here's the recoil assembly of these two saws. We have a little bit different engagement system with the pawls on the flywheel, but they're both canted back. They're both pretty small, which you'd expect. They both have a lot of open area to let the air get in and cool things off, which is good. The 550 is also sporting the ram air system, I call it, air injection for the off the flywheel. You can see there's the little shroud right there that's directing the air into the carb box. It's an interesting concept. I kind of segued off back. Now we're going back forward. If we look at the carburetors, that's next in line. We have about a 15 millimeter Venturi adjustable screws here, at least at this point. Standard old style. It's a Walbro carburetor. This is what we have with the auto-tune system. Zama carburetor. I think it's about 11 and a half, the diameter of the Venturi, so it's super small, but we do have that fresh air system going in there. Anyway, we're kind of having an issue where we're creating a bunch of heat with that fresh air. We kind of segued off of that for a second. We'll get back on that in a second. We'll look at the intake manifolds. This part's the front part of the carb box, essentially. It's done with the cover itself. If you look inside, here's basically the wall that separates the carb box from the cylinder. It's not the same. I don't know why they did it that way. Just an interesting concept. Nice straight open tube, nice and round, nice and smooth. Goes to a triangular shape on the 550. If we look at what's happening with the intake manifold on the 346, we see that it actually has a little ring in here with a bunch of holes in it. It's going to help keep the manifold from collapsing or getting deformed, but it's also going to act somewhat as a atomization little system, similar to what's going on with the still concept, just not as rough. This is a much smoother system what they're doing, so atomization isn't going to be as great necessarily. Nice round open hole goes to an oblong shape. We looked at the 550, nice round hole goes to a triangular shape. If we look at the we'll look at the piston skirts in a minute. We'll check that out. But if we look at the cylinders themselves, much shorter operation. This one's canted back on the cases. You can see that it's not even close to the way it's set up. If we look at the 346 version, see that's kind of oblong shaped. It gets more oblong as you get in the cylinder itself, trying to spread it out a little bit. Quad loop system, start of the circuit for the quad loops in the cylinder. Decent size for the size of it. If you look down at the combustion chamber, it's relatively small for the size of the saw. Exhaust duration isn't much, but it's real wide for the size of the bore. We're going to evacuate the spent gases pretty good, have that it's wide, being that it's wide. If we look at the front of it, we see that it's not too much different in shape, so we're not trying to change it much in the exhaust in the 346. If we look at the 550, we can see that the stratification air is coming in on the sides through these two ports here. Rectangular shape for the most part. Transfer port, intake port going in there. If we look inside, again, it's kind of rectangular shape. That works well with the piston design with this particular style. You can see that's the fresh air, the stratification circuit coming in up high, transfer ports down low. It's pretty wide. It has pretty good duration. If you look at the exhaust, I don't have an old cylinder to compare the ovalization process, but that's what it looks like now. If we look down into combustion chamber, we see that it's pretty big actually compared to the 346. We see that this is running pretty dirty. If you can see the carbon down there, I'm thinking you can see that. This is run on a quote-unquote quality synthetic mix oil, but it's leaving its mark on this system. I'm not impressed with that particular mix oil choice. We're going to remain nameless at this point. If we look, we'll look at the wrist pins real quick so I don't forget. There's about a 5-gram difference in the two. They're the same 10 millimeter size. If we look at the bearings, we see they're exactly the same. The wear on the 550, which has way less time than the 346, is much greater on the side, and the color's actually even better. This has been living on Motul. Like I said, we've been doing a lot of climbing mostly with this saw, so it's idled a lot. I think it's a little dirtier than what you normally see, but it idles way more than normal as well, so that's kind of a give and take. If we look at the piston, this is the 43 millimeter piston coming out of the 550. We see a lot of wear on the back of the skirt. One of the problems with these new smog saws, they run hot and they have sloppy tolerances right out of the box. 3.2 is nothing. I've seen them up to 3.8, brand new coming out of the box. Not this particular brand, however. That was a still in all actuality. So they're sloppy and they run hot, which makes sense because there's going to be more expansion the hotter they run. But if we look at the back of the skirt, we see it's got to be a pretty narrow intake port, because we have a skirt that's got a funky shape. The fresh air's coming in here, trying to blow it into the actually the end of the transfer port circuit. And we got a big old huge dead port in there. That's actually catching some of it as well, keeping it captive. But a pretty dirty situation. You can see there's a lot of stain already. This is the piston out of the 346 big bore kit, 45 millimeter. You can see it's actually not too bad for the amount of time, and considering it's been run super rich because it's been idling for most of its life. We look at the back of the skirt, it's super awesome shape still, and like I said, much more time. We've been running that saw, like I made that in 2006, ran it off and on over the years in various applications, firewood cutting, climbing, a little bit of production cutting, so it's seen some pretty serious time. If we look at the combustion chamber, we see that it's pretty much for the most part spotless. I think that says quite a bit about the oil itself. I prefer oils that have a high density. their resistance to the lateral thrust that's happening when the piston rolls around. It's not going to crush as easy. I like a high viscosity, especially when you're dealing with these stratification engines that burn really hot. You got to have a good film strength, in my professional opinion, I guess, at that point. The other part of the equation, we're looking at the flash point a little bit. That tells you how stable the oil is. The higher the flash point, the more stable the oil is. Handles the heat a little bit better. But that's from my perspective, of course. One thing you got to remember, some of the oil actually burns off in this process. I've heard of guys running their mixes up to 100 to 1. I would never do that personally. The problem is some of the oil, like I said, is burning off in the combustion process. What you're left with is the residual. That's going to do all of the lubricating. I don't ever mix mine too far away from 50 to 1, which would be a 2% concentration. Either one of these saws, I would be doing the same kind of a situation, but we kind of digress. Let's look at the mufflers real quick. We have super lightweight and small, super small hole. In there you can see it's got a little teeny tiny hole about as big around as my pinky. Pretty good size opening in the back, which obviously mates up with the cylinder port. If we look at the hole in the 550, it's about the same. There's a little bit pipe that's about this long in there. There's a tube in here. We can see it has to go into this hole. It's about the same size as my pinky right there. Then there's two bigger holes. It lets it disperse out of the tube into the main part of the chamber, but it still has to go through the little teeny tiny hole. But it's a really heavy muffler. That's one thing you can notice about it right away. If we look at the nuts and bolts, same kind of a concept with the cooling plate. They both run in aluminum, although there's another version that you can sometimes get with the 346. I don't run that particular version. This is the front support, 346. 4 bolts are what holding the 550 muffler down. 10 millimeter plug, that's what they're going to with this new stuff, but there's the nuts and bolts of the operation. If we look at the 346, has the standard old style plug, 14 millimeter. There's the testimony on the richness that we're talking about. Like I said, a lot of idling time. Muffler bolts are quite long. Cooling plates pretty small. If we look at the cases, we see that this is a normal size and shape of what you'd think to see in a engine that has quad loops. You'll notice it doesn't have a full circle crank, but we do have an aluminum flywheel. And I lost my dog. Dog is found. Unlimited coil, of course. Can't have those 16,000 RPMs if you're running a limited coil. If we look in at the 550, conceptually, a lot of the same ideas, except if we look at the crank, we see it has caps actually with some nylon spacers in there that fit over the top of the throws. You can see there are the throws right there. They're both sporting pretty long rods, though. I really prefer that myself. You get a better dwell time situation, but here we're trying to stuff the charge up through the start of the transfer port circuit. I think I covered about everything that I need to at this point. We're running out of time in a hurry. I thank you for watching this session. I don't think I've forgotten anything. A lot of times what we do on the mufflers on these is rhinoize them. This is the muffler off of this saw. You can tell she's got quite a bit of time on it. But anyway, back on track. Thank you for watching this session. And I hope that wherever you might be on God's green earth, that you're having a blessed day.